And joining us on the news to discuss this is an international analyst, Bolu Michael-Biyi, and he joins me live from Manzini in Eswatini. Thank you so much, Bolu, for coming around.
Thank you for having me.
So, given the increasing frequency of journalist casualties in Gaza, what patterns, if any, can be identified in the targeting, or let's say proximity of media personnel to military operations?
Well, I think there's actually a pattern of proximity. Journalists often gather in civilian areas, be it hospitals, schools, and all that, rescue sites, and community spaces where all the strikes happen. That's usually the target of the opposition. So we've seen a trend whereby there's a first strike that hits, and then a second strike hits when the rescuers and journalists and all the civilians, other civilians arrive at the site. So there's been this pattern or trend of double strikes taking place. So in modern asymmetric wars like the one we're seeing now, journalists, they risk being seen less as neutral observers. They are seen more as intelligence sources, especially by the enemies. So they're seen as an intelligence risk because of their cameras, their machines, and the kind of reporting they do. And because of this, journalists are not usually encouraged to go to war areas, to war zones. It's not like journalists are being targeted. It's just that they get caught up in the operational space of war.
You say they're not being targeted, but then let's look at the implications of these repeated journalist casualties, most especially in Gaza, on press freedom and war reporting in conflict zones.
Okay, the effect of this is that, journalists will be afraid of getting into conflict zones, and that would in turn reduce the coverage of that particular war. If we don't have independent reporters, then the world is going to get a skewed perspective of what's going on ground. The world will get information from officials and partisan sources, which are usually not credible or which are not, many times not accurate. And there's also a risk of having a precedent whereby, other areas, other conflict areas would follow a particular pattern. If they see, for example, that in Gaza, journalists are not being protected, these other conflict zones may want to follow the same pattern. And in turn, the public would lose access to credible information. The public would lose access to first-hand reporting, and that will weaken the accountability of the war.
Okay, so if we say that these journalists are not being targeted, let's look at it from the intelligence and let's say targeting point of view. How do you think that military personnel can distinguish between combatants and non-combatants in densely populated areas?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a distinction problem. It happens all the time in different contexts. For example, women and children are often used as human shields. And that is terrorists. They do that a lot. So that the targeting will be a problem for the opposition. So there's a distinction problem in places like hospitals. Fighters and civilians, they mix in those places, and that makes targeting decision harder. Armies often say that there are sites that they are used for dual purpose. What do I mean by that? It means that they are used for both civilian and military purposes. So journalists, they cluster at these attack sites to give their report, and this may be misinterpreted as an association with the militants or with the enemies. So journalists, they die not always because they are a direct target. They are usually not a direct target, but because of how intelligence reads the situation in crowded zones. And like I said earlier, they are often perceived as an intelligence risk by the opposition.
Well, just so that we hope that more markers or maybe protection mechanism can be provided for these people who actually lose their lives, sacrificing their lives on the line of duty to get us the stories. Thank you so much, Bolu Michael-Biyi, for sharing your thoughts with us.